Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another quick take. See that some people are still rolling in, so let's give it a minute. All right. Let me lay down some expectations first. I know sometimes during these webinars, some people like to raise their hand. What I'd like to do is actually run through the entire process, and you can ask questions while I'm going through the presentation, but I'll answer all of them when the presentation is finished. I'll read the questions out loud so everybody knows what's being asked, and we'll answer anything you have. But please don't raise your hand because I really won't see it. I'm paying attention to the presentation. So what we're going to talk about today is the special considerations for configuring ControlPoint to work with SSL. And ultimately, the goal is so that you only have the alternate access mapping for just the HTTPS in the default zone. So where we're going to start is not with how to set up SSL. It's assumed that you know how to set up SSL. It's the same as setting up SSL for any other SharePoint site. More or less, you've got a binding set for HTTPS with a valid SSL certificate. And there's consequences to not having if you create a self-certificate. I'll speak to that at the very end. But let's say you've got SSL set up for the ControlPoint site, so there's HTTPS, and back in the alternate access mappings, we've got the alternate access mapping for the HTTPS. Ultimately, when we're done doing all this configuration, you can come back here and actually remove the HTTP alternate access mapping, so that you're left with just HTTPS. But when you do set up the alternate access mapping, at the start, you were going to have HTTP be the default zone. So you're going to have to change that so that the default zone is the HTTPS zone. But other than that, there's nothing special in the alternate access mappings. So let's go back to my Word document. And this document that I'll be going through today, we will post as a knowledge base item, so you don't have to take screenshots or anything. And as well, the entire quick take presentation is being recorded right now and will be loaded on our website as a knowledge base item that you can refer back to at any time. So there's really only a few things that you have to worry about, or have to take care of, I should say, to get ControlPoint being strictly SSL. And actually being strictly SSL is the preferred mode of not leaving the HTTP alternate access mapping. And I'll explain why, because it's really only going to work everywhere if it's all or nothing. Either you're using SSL completely or you're not. There's some gotchas if you try to do a hybrid of leaving that HTTP alternate access mapping available. And for the most part, people who are setting up ControlPoint on SSL, they really only want it accessible via the HTTPS address anyway. So, but we'll go through the considerations. So the first thing that we want to have you do is go into ControlPoint and get to this Manage Farm list and change the farm URL to be your SSL address. So let's do that. Okay, so we go into ControlPoint, go to the Manage tab, and Manage Farm List. We'll wait for that to come up. And this one's already been edited, but to edit it, you just hit this edit over here, and that'll allow you to edit the farm URL. So you enter the HTTP address. I'm going to talk about why there's these few different places that you have to set these. There's certain places where this farm URL is accessed as the URL to use for a ControlPoint action. All right, so we've set that. Let's go back to our Word document. And now we want to go into the ControlPoint settings list, and we want to change the inbound ControlPoint URL to match, to have the correct HTTPS address. So that's up here in the control point configuration settings. Let's wait for that to load. Did it take it? Maybe it didn't. Okay. Miscellaneous and custom, inbound control point URL. You can see that I've already edited it. It's using the HTTP address that I set up in the alternate access mapping and the binding. So that's step number 2. Come to the configuration settings, set the inbound control point URL to use that SSL address. And next we have to, there's a web config file where we have to change wherever it says transport credential only, we have to change that to transport. And wherever it says HTTP get enabled, change it to HTTPS get enabled. So let's go back over onto the server. And here's the web config. It's all the way down on the Hive common files, all the way down template layouts Exceller. So in that Exceller directory. And let's edit it. And we will find, oh, pardon me, transport. And it's here several times, and the directions say change wherever it says transport credential only to transport. And this is really the information because this is commented. So you're not going to change just transport credential to transport. You're really just coming down to where it says the actual uncommented line, security mode. And I've changed it from transport credential only to just transport. And let's see how many there are. So here's another section. So there's another one. I believe there's 6 or 7. There's another one. That's 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's see if there's another one. Yep, 7. So any uncommented line that says transport credential only needs to go to just transport. And I've already done it in this file, as you can see, right here and everywhere that it's occurred. And the other was HTTP get enabled. So HTTP get ought to be good enough. I'll have to go up. They're all above here. And what did I type wrong? Hold on, bear with me. I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. I did not check the second value. Apparently on the newer version we do not need to change the get enabled, HTTP get enabled. I'm just going to search really quickly to make sure it's not here and I'm just missing it. A little embarrassing, I apologize. I don't see it, so I'll have to change that in the documentation. And let's see. And you'll have to do that for every web front-end server in the farm because there's a web config on every server. So you have to make sure you cover that on every web front-end in the farm. Now, updating the farm properties. There's a utility, it's the license utility, that has a config file. When we say the farm properties, there's a couple of instances in ControlPoint where we have to go to the SharePoint farm properties to ask what's the URL for ControlPoint. We store the URL via this license manager. So there's a client config file for running the utility. So let's go over and find that. And that would be in Program Files, MetaLogics, ControlPoint Features, and it's X's, so let's go down. XE client config file. I'm going to edit this. And there's two values, CP website URL and ControlPoint URL. And you have to put in the new HTTPS address. Now once you have this modified and saved, you'll run the license utility. And let's see if the license utility is going to be here easily enough for us. Launch the license manager. All right, so I've saved this file, and I'll run the utility, and I will choose. I don't want to do it actually here, so let me just show you what it looks like. This is what the license manager will come up. You'll choose change to renew the terms of your ControlPoint license, and then you'll hit record license. Now, what this does is takes that new URL that you edited in the file, and it tells the SharePoint farm properties that the URL for ControlPoint is the HTTPS address. Now I want to talk about why you have to go to so many different places. You change the config file to run the license manager to get the farm properties to say that's the HTTPS address is the URL for ControlPoint. Where does that get used? That gets used when the timer jobs for discovery and the scheduled job review run. So we have the timer jobs in ControlPoint that are going to kick off discovery at night, and the other timer job for the scheduled jobs kicks off every 10 minutes. That's not in the context of using ControlPoint. Those are timer jobs. So that's where we reach out to the SharePoint farm properties and say, where is the ControlPoint URL? What's the URL I'm supposed to use to run this discovery or to check these scheduled jobs? So it has really nothing to do with the user or any UI interface. It's where did we hide the URL for ControlPoint for when the timer jobs run. Let's go back and talk about the inbound ControlPoint URL. What is that used for? Well, that's used for when you're in ControlPoint, and let's just say you're going to run a report. So let's say SharePoint summary report. When you hit this run now, we're going to that inbound ControlPoint URL to say what's the URL that we're supposed to call. ControlPoint uses the Windows Communication Foundation WCF calls, and we can't just hard code localhost 1818 or anything like that. So we have to have that inbound ControlPoint URL to reference to say we're making a call, the server is making a call to itself, what's the URL? And that's when we use the inbound ControlPoint URL. Now, going back to where I was saying at the very beginning, you don't want to have a hybrid where you've left that alternate access mapping for the HTTP there. You don't want that to be available. You really don't, because some things will work, some things won't. The only way things work across the board is if when you go to SSL that you only have the binding for HTTPS left, which is the reason why it has to be the default, because you're going to end up deleting the HTTP alternate access mapping. Let's go back to ControlPoint. All right. So under different circumstances, you could have left that HTTP, but if you did, there are certain things that just won't work. For instance, up here where it says system account, I am logged on as the system account, but if you didn't make all the changes properly, anybody who logs into ControlPoint, it would always say system account. For any user account, it would say system account. There's just all sorts of crazy things that happen. So Let's go back over again and just run through the steps. There's really not a whole lot to it. We changed the manage farm list, and we changed the inbound control point URL, and we modified the web config file to change transport credential only to transport, and we would have to do that on every web front end. And then we modified the XE client config file to run the license utility again, and we hit record license and record the HTTP address into the SharePoint farm properties for when we look them up. We know how to get there. Now let's talk about some optional steps. In some environments, reports might hang or fail to return results after this maintenance. And you should only do these things if you run into these problems. So there's a parameter called multiprocess to true. And this is if the reports are hanging or failing to return the results. So you start a report and you sit and you wait and nothing ever comes back. So that's when we would want you to change multiprocesses to true. Where is that? It's in the configuration settings. And it's always easier for me to forget about the categories and just do it alphabetically. Multiple processes. It's under special purpose, and it's set to false. But if after doing this SSL configuration, your reports just weren't coming back, you hit the run now and nothing was really happening, we'd have to have you come here and change this to true, and then you would have to recycle the application pool for the control point site. Now there's another one. Set the parameter name to ignore SSL certificate. Let's go back to, I promised at the very beginning I talk about the certificate. If you create a self-certificate, it's not a valid, trusted SSL certificate. Let me bring over another document here. Hold on. Okay. If you didn't have a trusted SSL cert, when users tried to use ControlPoint, they had this, there's a problem, do you want to continue message? And yes, you could continue onto the website and everything would work. But not so for the jobs running in the background. So if your inbound ControlPoint has the HTTP address, you're using SSL with a untrusted certificate. It'll say the underlying connection was closed, could not establish trust relationship. The remote certificate is invalid according to the validation procedure. That's because you don't have a trusted certificate. That's not so much a control point issue. It's more of just straight SSL cert and trusts. There is a URL here that is a good blog for explaining how you can go ahead and get that trust created for that certificate. I don't have time to go into that, and it's actually really not a control point issue. It's just you use a certificate that isn't trusted. You created a self-signed certificate. And that is really all there is to it. Does anybody have any questions? I don't see any questions coming in just yet, but I'm going to give you time to compose them. Hard to believe that there isn't any questions. I'm not that good. Here we go. Any special steps for load balancing over SSL? All right, I'm getting some questions now. I'll take them one at a time. Fred Flintstone, okay. Sorry, I joined late, so maybe you touched on this already. Any special considerations for load balancing over SSL? That in itself is actually a whole another topic, which would probably take just as long as this quick take. I promise you we will cover that in another quick take, but we definitely don't have time to cover it today. I apologize. Let's see. All right, I have another one from David Castator. Actually do have that missing web config file line for HTTPS get enabled equals true. I don't know why I didn't find that in my web config. Just a little bit of panic there. It probably should be there. Suggest you take a second look, he says. Oh, right. I had already changed it to HTTPS, and when I was looking for HTTP, I didn't get it. Good catch, Dave. Another mystery solved. Let's go back there. Yay, there it is. Thanks, guys. All right, so there are a number of places this is mentioned again. And again, when we say replace it everywhere, we don't really mean on the commented line where we're actually just showing what we want you to do. We just actually mean in the actual line itself that's not commented out. And there's a bunch of these as well. Let's just check how many. There's the 1, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. So there's a half dozen of those. Good catch, guys. Let me get back to the questions. Also, I think you missed updating the ControlPoint custom web config. The ControlPoint custom web config, let's check that one out. Now, where am I going for that one? Back to the Exceller. Okay. Yep. This is if you have installed, if you've made ControlPoint available in the SharePoint sites, this web config file gets used to navigate back to ControlPoint. So that's a good catch. Hadn't even thought about that one. So in here, we have the regular HTTP address for a different installation of ControlPoint. Actually, looks like a native kit. So ignore these values because in a standard installation, you wouldn't have sites cpconfig. This is a native installation, so this is a bad example to use, but this test server gets used a lot, so we've had ControlPoint configured several different ways. All right, let me get back to the questions. All right, I answered somebody's, Teresa's question already. Yes, edit xcclient.exe config for all web front ends. Actually, no. The xcclient.exe config is just the config file for the license utility, and you're really only running the license utility on the server where ControlPoint is installed. The license utility does things like gives the service account all the access it needs both in SharePoint and in SQL, and it also sets the URL for ControlPoint into the SharePoint farm properties. So it's really, that config is only on one server. All right. Still looking for any other questions that I might have missed. If I haven't answered your question, can you please post it again so I know that I didn't miss it? There's quite a few here. And no, I'm not seeing it. I'll give a little bit more time, see if anybody else has any other questions that I've neglected to answer. And to get back to Fred, who asked about any special steps for load balancing over SSL. The fact of the matter is there are so many different variations. This quick take here was specifically for getting rid of the HTTP alternate access mapping so that you're only completely SSL. But as soon as you bring a load balancer into it, there could be different configurations based upon what load balancer you're using, for example. So we'll want to put together a comprehensive quick take session for just that one topic. And speaking of other topics, does anybody have any other topics in mind that they'd like to see down the road with another quick take? Because these are going to be regular control point quick takes. Should be once every 2 weeks. So we're going to need the topics people want to hear about. So here's your chance. Okay, here's one from David. Discovery configuration best practices. That's that's on the list already. Okay, another one. And why you don't want to load balance your control point. Apparently David has had some issues trying to use SSL with a load balancer for control point. Or maybe not. Here's another one from Teresa. How about tips for setting browser bookmarks for all the different CP URLs, configuration sites, etc.? Yeah, we could do that. All right. This quick take was scheduled from 2 to 2:30. I know everybody's time is valuable, but I will hang out for another couple of minutes, see if any other suggestions or questions come in. Okay, again, everybody, usually within a day of the quick take, we get the recording posted on our website in the knowledge base. So if you went to Metalogics.com and went to the support tab and clicked on knowledge base, usually within a day you can get these recordings. And also the document that I used, the companion document I used, we will be posting that as a knowledge base item as well. All right, looks like not getting any more suggestions or questions. I want to thank everybody for coming today, and I hope this has been helpful, and thanks for bearing with me when I was looking for the wrong thing, and thanks for pointing it out. I was going to go back and look at it after the webinar to find out what dumb thing I did. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. Wait, another comment, hold on. All right, had actually a private message from one of the attendees. Don't need to talk about that one. So I guess the webinar is over. I want to thank everybody again for participating and look forward to doing more sessions. Thank you very much. Take care.